Okay, these are our notes for Standard 2.1b. In this, we're going to take a look at the various types of transport that can happen through a cell membrane. Okay, so we'll explain the role of the cell membrane as being a highly selective barrier to different things that can get in and out of the cell, and we'll talk specifically about types of transport, like the types of diffusion, osmosis, and the various types of active transport. So you'll be able to describe the structure of the cell membrane. That's what this podcast is going to concentrate on, and then in the next few we will take a look at the different types of transport. Okay, we'll relate how the structure of the cell membrane makes it selectively permeable. So what is it about it that makes it selectively permeable? And then we're going to talk about the different types of diffusion, osmosis, facilitated diffusion, and then specifically active transport. So we've got quite a bit of vocabulary in here, but some of the words are going to make sense. Some of them you have seen before. You've probably all heard of osmosis before. And diffusion, we'll talk about what passive and active actually mean as we go through these notes. So we're going to start off by taking a look at cell membranes in general. So remember, all cells have plasma membranes around the outside. Every single cell that exists, whether it's prokaryotic or eukaryotic, has a cell that goes around the outside of the cell. But in eukaryotes, those cell membranes can go even further in. So not only are they around the outside of the cell, they're also surrounding the nucleus. They're surrounding the vacuoles, and they also make up the structures of a lot of different cells in our body, or the parts of our cells. So they actually make up the structure of the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi apparatus. Remember, the endoplasmic reticulum was like one long membrane all folded up, whereas the Golgi apparatus was a bunch of membranes stacked on top of each other. So either our organelles are surrounded by membranes or they are made of membranes. The only organelle that does not follow that rule is the ribosome. All right, so what does the plasma membrane do for us? Number one function is that it controls what enters and exits the cell, and that happens so that the cell can stay in homeostasis. So we need to keep everything in internal balance, so you need to have certain materials getting in, and you need to be able to get rid of waste products and other things that are made. And so the cell membrane is going to control that whole entire process. Also, it is going to provide protection and support for the cell. It gives it its shape, holds in all of the cytoplasm and all that kind of stuff. All right, continuing on, what is the cell membrane made of? So the basic structure of a cell membrane is going to hinge completely around this little guy here, which is called a phospholipid. We talked about these before when we did our lipid section. These have some special characteristics which are going to allow them to make up the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is actually called a phospholipid bilayer. So remember, bi means two, so these are two layers of phospholipids comprise the entire cell membrane. A phospholipid has two parts to it. One part is a water-loving head. We call it polar or hydrophilic. So here is the head up here. It is water-loving. That means it's attracted to water. It likes to hang out with water. The tails are nonpolar. That makes them hydrophobic. That means they are water-fearing. So they like to avoid water whenever possible. So you want to keep those things away from the water. Because of the way that the phospholipids are structured like this, that is going to allow them to make this really neat looking little bilayer together. Now also within this bilayer, you've got a bunch of proteins that are all going throughout it, and you also have cholesterol molecules, which is another type of lipid that are going to provide strength and flexibility to the membrane overall. Okay, so we call the cell membrane model a fluid mosaic, which means the membrane is not a just static, non-moving thing. It is constantly moving. The parts of it allow it to do that and allow it to perform certain functions. So here we have our phospholipid bilayer. And you can see that you have tails that are pointing in and the heads are pointing out. And that's because, remember, the heads love the water. Okay, so those are our polar heads, our hydrophilic heads that love the water. They like to be pointed towards it. So the outside and inside of the cell are mostly water, so those heads are going to point towards the water. The tails, on the other hand, are nonpolar, and they are going to hide from the water. So they're pointing away from the water. So as in this kind of structure here, they're not in contact with water at all because the heads are protecting them. And that gives us our two layers of phospholipids but the tails are facing each other and the heads are attracted to the water. So it kind of works the same way as when you put oil and water together. The oil floats on top, in a sense, to kind of get away from the water. That is what the tails are doing. They're trying to get away from the water. Now, also within your cell membrane, you've got a couple of other parts. So you've got your proteins here. You'll be labeling this structure later on in the notes again. But you do have some proteins, and you have some carbohydrate cell markers that are on there that are going to be used for recognition. And we'll go into a little more detail with what these different parts are. All right, so let's take a closer look at the actual proteins that are within a cell membrane. So the purpose of the proteins, they're going to determine what particles can pass through the membrane. So they're kind of making the decision as to what kinds of things can get through. Some of them are also going to serve as enzymes for the cell, so they can speed up chemical reactions. So a lot of times cells have to come in contact with other elements that are in the body or whatever, and they have to make things happen quickly. So you have some proteins that are going to act as enzymes. And then you have many that are going to act as markers for recognition. Basically, all of your cells have markers on them, not the kind that you draw with, but these are chemical markers that are going to allow your cells to know that they belong to you. And that way your immune system doesn't attack your own cells. Whenever foreign cells come into your body, cells that belong to somebody else or cells of, like of bacteria or something like that, your body will attack them because they don't recognize them as belonging there. And so these markers that are on the outside of your cells, which are mostly made of carbohydrates, are really important because they're hanging off of these proteins, and that's what is basically the signal, the calling card, yes, I belong here. Okay, so here's the structure I want you to label in your notes. So you have your bilayer right here. Here you have one of your transport proteins, and you actually see that it forms a channel that goes right through the membrane. So most things are not going to be able to get through these phospholipids, but when you have a big opening like this, you're able to get some stuff through there. You have a couple of other proteins over here. Some of them go all the way through, and some of them are just hanging out on one side. They don't go all the way through. And some of them don't have a pore or an opening in them. So these ones are typically used for recognition, or they may be enzymes. So there are various types of jobs that they're going to do. And then all in here, remember you've got your phospholipids. And this is just showing you a piece. Remember, this whole thing would continue all the way around the entire cell. But remember, here's your outside of the cell, and your outside of the cell is mostly water. So you can think of it kind of like your blood. Your blood's mostly water. And remember, the inside of the cell is cytoplasm. That is also mostly water, all on the inside of your cell. So these heads are attracted to the water, and the tails are staying away from it. Okay. Here's another picture of this. This one is showing you the cholesterol molecules that may also be found. So here's the outside of the cell and the inside again. So you've got your cytoskeleton and stuff in here. Your phospholipid bilayer is going up this way. So here's a membrane protein. Your chains, but sometimes the cholesterol will be in there, and the cholesterol is kind of just giving a little more support and structure for the membrane and actually allowing it to move a little bit, because a lot of this stuff is kind of moving around inside the membrane, so the cholesterol is just giving a little bit of support. Okay, and finally, remember that cell membranes have pores or holes in them. And these are going to be really what is going to make the membrane selectively permeable. So these pores are going to kind of decide what can get in and out of the cell. And that's what makes it selective. So only certain types of molecules are going to be able to get through these proteins that have these openings. And anything that doesn't fit or isn't the right kind of chemical is not going to be able to get through. And the fact that there is selectively permeable properties to the cell membrane actually adds to the protection piece for the entire cell, because you're not just letting anything get in and out of the cell. Only certain things can do that. So in the next podcast, we're going to talk about these different types of transport that can happen because of the selectively permeable factors that go along with the cell membrane.